You're watching the WPTV To The Point special, the Mast-Pam Keith debate.
Welcome back, and of course I humbly acknowledge there's so many topics to talk about. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can in this hour. One of the chief ones that's so bedeviled so many of you on the Treasure Coast over this past decade, water quality issues, as we're again rejoined by Democrat Pam Keith, the challenger, and incumbent Republican Congressman Brian Mast. Ms. Keith, you're quoted in TC Palm as proposing the federal government take at least some of the land south of Lake Okeechobee by eminent domain. Why? And why your critique of Congressman Mast on water policy when he largely has gotten pretty high marks across the board from many. But first to this issue about eminent domain, then to your more broad critique of your opponent.
The reason I mentioned that is because I think it's my duty to inform people and tell them the truth. Eminent domain was always a possibility, and it's not something that Congress does, it's something that an administration does. And I know that Brian knows this because Donald Trump wanted to use it to build a stupid wall that could be defeated by a rope or a ladder. Eminent domain is just a tool of the government, and it's a last-ditch effort when you can't get any kind of movement through good faith bargaining. We have had the same problem for 33 years. Brian has told people in too many glossy flyers to count how he wants the water to get south into the Everglades. What he's failed to do is say why it isn't happening and what we can do differently to make it so.
Congressman, I know water quality issues is something you've touched on. Speak to the critique of your opponent and what you consider your biggest accomplishment when it comes to water policy and the biggest task ahead when it comes to making sure that the St. Lucie River, the estuary, the Indian River Lagoon, and all the residents who live, work, and play along there can have some certainty about their health and economic future. First to you, sir.
That's a lot for a minute 15, but I'll try.
We'll probably stretch it a bit for both of you.
To her point about eminent domain, I think it shows a lack of education on the issue on this front. If you were to go out there and try to do eminent domain for the southern reservoir, which I wrote the bill for in Congress in order to get that approved federally, you would be looking at probably pushing that reservoir back at least 10 years because of the lawsuits, because of the dollars that you would have to get to go out there and do eminent domain, because you would have to deauthorize the reservoir at the state level and at the federal level, and then go back in and reauthorize it. What have we done well? Working hand in hand, Republicans and Democrats and the president, we've gone out there and we've authorized $250 million for South Florida ecosystem restoration projects. We've successfully changed the way that we manage Lake Okeechobee, preventing discharges this year so far, last year as well, even with a Category 5 hurricane right on our shores. We didn't have to spend one extra dollar to do it, and we didn't have to take 10 years to build something to do it. We just advocated to change the way we managed Lake Okeechobee, and it was also a good use of taxpayer dollars because we didn't have to spend any differently. We worked with the EPA to get them to write a standard for what they considered to be algal blooms that were too toxic for human contact. And the last point that I would make to you is I sit on the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, the #1 committee for this, and my opponent has given zero indication of what committee it is that she'd like to go out there and work on.
Ms. Keith, specific to what you proactively see are the challenges ahead. You've heard the congressman's critique. You heard that we have a reservoir coming. You've heard about some of the other water retention projects. What specifically and proactively do you want to do as a freshman congressperson, should that come to pass, to help improve the quality? Not what he doesn't want to do or what you don't think he's done. What is your specific action plan? Beyond eminent domain, which I might add has been talked about for decades, never seems to happen.
Let's get clear. What Brian is talking about is discharges into the river, but what he's not talking about is environmental stewardship of any kind. Our problem is that our Everglades are dying, and Brian doesn't seem to care. Our problem is that our lagoon is dying, and Brian doesn't seem to care. He's a micro-environmentalist. He cares about the environment between the lake and the beach and nowhere else. He's not cognizant of the role of climate change that is affecting king tides if you live in St. Lucie County.
Ms. Keith, with respect, you're not answering what your specific action plan would be. Please answer that.
Absolutely. The beautiful thing about being a Democrat is that we believe in environmental stewardship and we believe in science and climate change. I can put a whole team of Democrats together to vote to appropriate our full CERP, not just some little tiny piece of it. And I can do it in a way that's going to cause them to want to come down here, learn about our water problems, and work collaboratively, get us back into the Paris Climate Accord, get us back into real environmental stewardship, and actually fix these problems in a long-term, systemic way. This sort of, oh, we just lowered the lake and that fixed all the problems. Our lake right now is at 15.75 feet. It is a biscuit from discharges happening right now. The reason it's not happening right now is because of the king tides. So this is not fixed, and that's why I'm going to do something different.
Congressman Mast, it's an important enough topic that we'll give you a full time and then a counter response from Ms. Keith. Speak to her critique and speak a little bit more in a focused way about what we need to do going forward above and beyond what you say you've done. Go ahead, sir.
Sure. Environment is the #1 thing that I work on. Environment and veterans. That's what I spend my time doing in Congress. Again, the specific committee work that I do. Legislation that I just passed and that I'm going to continue to move into the future. I just passed legislation through the House that said the Corps of Engineers now has to forecast algal blooms, look at where they might be coming from, tell the community how they test and what the hazards are of those tests. I've been pushing legislation to say because we now have a standard that the EPA put forward of 8 parts per billion, that being too toxic for human beings to come in contact with, and we have algal blooms in the lake often of 400 to 800 parts per billion. I'm pushing legislation to say that that never be allowed to come into our community. I'm working to get more water to the Everglades by the way that we manage Lake Okeechobee. I know she gave me a critique on that. Getting more water into the Caloosahatchee because they need more water at the right time of year. But I would again throw this question out there in my remaining time. Ms. Keith, you've given us no indication of what committee it is that you want to sit on. I sit on the committee that the #1 bit of work that we do is to fight for our environment.
45-second response to that specific question, Ms. Keith, and then we're going to move on.
Brian sits as a minority seat on a committee on which he has virtually no power. So it may be nice that he sits on that committee, but it's really Democrats who are going to get this problem fixed. I'd also like to make perfectly clear that while Brian says he's working for veterans, when Donald Trump insults our veterans, Brian is absolutely silent. When Donald Trump said PTSD was just weak-mindedness, Brian was absolutely silent. With friends like Brian, veterans don't really need enemies.
Congressman Mast, allow you a 45-second response to that criticism.
Certainly. Ms. Keith still didn't tell us what committee she was interested in being on, but I would say this about our president and about myself for veterans. Every single time that I've seen the president in person, he's made it a point to make eye contact with me, whether we're close enough for me to hear the words to tell me that he thanks me for my service, or whether he could just mouth it to me to point me and thank me for something that I've done in terms of my sacrifice. He didn't owe it to me, but he did it every single time. I've been with him countless times with wounded warriors and presenting Medal of Honors to service members that have gone out there and served above and beyond the line of duty in such valorous ways. I believe that the president loves our veterans. I believe that he's done incredible work to make sure that we have a strong military and also get our veterans out of harm's way, our service members out of harm's way, and keep us out of some of these wars that we've been in for the last 20 years.
And thank you, and I know the veterans issues are keenly interesting for so many people, for all of us who salute all of our veterans everywhere. I do want to, as we talk environmental policy for the moment, and forgive me, we'd love to get to every single topic, and we have in individual interviews and we'll continue to. I want to ask, because it's a marker for a lot of elections, and I know we could spend an hour on this alone. Congressman Mast, do you believe that there are man-made implications and that climate change is at least partly a result of man-made impact?
Yes.
And
do you want me to elaborate further? But I can leave it there if you want me to. Yes.
Please elaborate further. And what specifically is your
plan? You and I have spoken about this.
What specifically is your plan to deal with that?
Yes, so you and I have been speaking about this since I was first-time candidate Brian Mast, that I said, yes, I think man-made climate change is a very real threat. It's one of the other reasons that I sit on the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, looking at what we have to deal with in a state like Florida, where so much of our state is at sea level in terms of fixed bridges, and how we prevent saltwater intrusion into our Everglades by managing Lake Okeechobee differently to get more water down there to do that, by getting more water to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or I'm sorry, getting more dollars to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers so that they can do things that they're looking at to help mitigate some of the threats of climate change. Sitting on the Climate Solutions Caucus and the Roosevelt Conservation Caucus, bipartisan groups where we go out there and we work specifically to address these issues, and I'm going to continue to do that again as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee.
Your climate plan, Ms. Keith, I know that you have been on record as saying you believe in man-made impact and involvement in creating climate change. Your action plan?
Absolutely. Climate change is an existential threat to this whole planet, not just this country. And what's so interesting to me is the zeal with which Brian is willing to say he believes science on climate change but ignores scientists on coronavirus. I find that intriguing. But I will say this, the United States has the opportunity to be the world leader on climate research and technology, and Florida can absolutely be at the forefront of that as the Sunshine State. As you know, I was in-house counsel for NextEra Energy, the biggest producer of clean and renewable energy in the country at that time. And so I know what could be done if we funded research and technology into clean and renewable energy the way that we give tax credits to oil and gas. And I want to be very clear about this. Because Donald Trump came here to much fanfare saying that he was going to put a moratorium on offshore drilling. Be clear here. Moratorium means they're just going to wait till after the election. Brian is not going to stop Donald Trump from befouling our beaches any more than he's stopped Donald Trump from befouling our country. That is not going to happen. Brian is an environmentalist in the same way that Trump is a businessman.
We need to move on to another topic because it's got has gotten, excuse my grammar, a great deal of airing of late. I did an in-depth interview with you about this, Congressman Mast. You both have made comments that your critics say were highly inappropriate, sexually charged comments. Both of you have been sharply criticized, and I know that you at home have heard what these comments are from both. How do you responsibly and with sensitivity move past this for your constituents? We begin with you, Congressman Mast.
I start with what you and I did together and what I did before that, which is an apology. I really am sorry for any time that I've ever made some stupid, juvenile joke in my past, whether it was 10 years ago or a dozen years ago or any time. I sincerely apologize for that, and I try to be a better person today and every day moving forward. I hope that when people look at me and they say, that's my representative, they say he's the sum of everything that he did after that. He's the sum of his service in the military. He's the sum of the way he raises his children and the kind of husband he is to his wife, his relationship with the Lord, the way that he goes out there and fights for people that have been raped, like a young woman in our community, Harmony Allen, whose case we are bringing before the Supreme Court in just a couple days. I hope when people look at me, they say, yes, he's worked very hard to grow and be a better person and be a good representative, and he's the sum of all those things. That's my hope.
Ms. Keith, do you accept that apology? And if you don't, why not?
Well, it's not actually up to me. He owes that to the people of CD18. But I will mention that Brian's comments were left up for 11 years for a reason. It's not that he had words that were offensive. It's that he had deep thoughts that are incredibly disturbing. Anybody who encourages a 30-year-old man to have sex with as many 15-year-old girls as he possibly can is disgusting. And it's not like we don't know that we have a problem with old men wanting sex with teenagers in this district. Jeffrey Epstein was quite successful here. Brian wants to get credit for the things he's done well, but there's plenty he's done badly, like not voting for the Violence Against Women's Act, or like supporting a guy like Donald Trump, who is constantly sexually assaulting people. So yeah, he's the sum of all of it, and I don't think that's particularly good.
Ms. Keith, you made comments that many found were way out of bounds when you talked about the now nominee of your party and rape, and said, well, he'd have to do a lot more of that to catch up to President Trump. Do you apologize for those comments?
Absolutely not, because this is a sea difference between what Brian said and what I said. Yeah, I was a little snarky, but I was making the point that those who live in glass houses should not throw stones. This was somebody who supports Donald Trump attacking Joe Biden, a man of 40 years in politics without a blemish, and saying, well, he's a sexual assaulter. And I thought it was kind of rich that somebody would stand with Donald Trump, who is so misogynistic and has had 29 allegations of sexual assault against him, would try to besmirch Joe Biden. You had to take my comment way out of context to try to make it sound like I was justifying sexual assault. I'm not taking Brian's comments out of context. I read them flat.
Ms. Keith, Congressman Mast, I want to let you respond because the ad's gotten a lot of airing. Ms. Keith, you're running an ad, and I'll let the congressman respond first. You're running an ad that implies basically that Congressman Mast is no better than sexual predator Jeffrey Epstein. Congressman Mast, your response to that ad?
Obviously, I think it's a disgusting ad. It's the political world that we live in, that these things occur. And again, all I can do is apologize for anything stupid that I've ever said in my past. And I think this is an important difference in how we see America, that I think Ms. Keith looks at America and she says, if you ever said something stupid in your past, made some juvenile joke, that should be an albatross around you for the rest of your life. You should lose your job. You should never be hired. These other things should happen to you. I would love to comment a moment on some policy that she talked about, which was the Violence Against Women Act, because we're asking to be representatives, and that's very important. She made this critique. She said, I didn't vote for the Violence Against Women Act. She's wrong on that front. We actually voted for the Violence Against Women Act twice in a matter of about 15 minutes. The version that I didn't vote for, that she would have liked me to vote for, it would have said that if you have a shelter for battered women, that you would have to allow somebody in there who's a man that's identifying as a woman. And it also said that if a person is going to be incarcerated, that they would get to go to the lockup of their choosing, again, based upon the gender that they identify with. She would want me to vote for that version and not the version that I voted for that didn't have that.
Ms. Keith, do you think that ad is, you're both veterans, you both served your nation, you swore to defend your nation. Do you think anything is beyond bounds? Do you think that ad comparing him to Jeffrey Epstein is fair? Is that something as a lawyer that if somebody said that about your client in court, you wouldn't raise your hand and say, objection? Do you think that's a fair ad to run against him?
Absolutely. Keep in mind, I didn't alter anything about what Brian said. I simply pointed out that he thought the same way that Epstein thought, the same way that Trump thought, and all of the people who pay for sex with teenage girls. It's the thoughts that's the problem. And I want to make clear that Brian's first justification for not voting for the Violence Against Women Act was just his bigotry against transgendered American, but that's actually not why. It's that it had gun provisions that he didn't like, and he got called on the carpet by the NRA, which he jumped to their tune. Again, let's be clear. It's not like we don't have a problem with people who go overseas to have sex with kids that have no power. It's not like we don't have a problem in the military with use of authority to keep victims of sexual assault quiet. It is disgusting to think that a sergeant in the Army was thinking that a great pickup line was, don't turn this rape into a murder. That's wild to me.
Briefly,
because I have to wonder about the women in his unit and how he treated them.
Briefly, Congressman Mast, brief response.
Yes, certainly. You know, I don't like to make excuse for anything because I think it cheapens any apology that you offer. I think it's appropriate that as an adult, you own the things that you say and you learn from them, and if they were wrong, you apologize for them. And so I don't try to sit there and make excuse for anything. I try to grow from them. Now, I will say this about my circle of friends, and I think a lot of people relate to this. The better friends that we are, the more that we rip on each other. And when I made that joke to one of my friends, it wasn't intending to be crude. It was just ripping on my friend, and beyond that, it was making a joke about somebody that was dating somebody actually 3 years older than him that I just thought looked significantly younger than him. I don't like to make excuse. I just want to apologize and leave it at that.
We're going to move on because there's other topics to cover. Racial equality, of course, is an issue. Along with COVID, I think you could fairly argue that those perhaps are two of the, if not the defining issues in many of the campaigns. Where, Congressman, have you fallen short in recognizing racial inequality? If you're reelected, how do you specifically promise your constituents you'll address it legislatively, sir?
Well, I look at this and I look at some of the policy out there. Maybe we'll talk specifically about police reform. That's one of the things out there that people have been discussing on this front. And we say that on any front for our law enforcement, I think that it has to be a declared acknowledgement that no law enforcement officer will ever punish somebody that they are detaining or arresting. That takes away somebody's right to due process when that occurs. I think that's a legislative goal that we should seek. What happened with George Floyd was an officer punishing somebody that they were detaining, and it resulted in killing him, and it took his life. And I would go beyond that and speak a little bit, if I have time, about Black Lives Matter, to say this. Black lives matter. They matter to me. The ones that I lost in combat, the friends of mine that I have in the community, those that my son plays football with, and the most unfortunate thing to me about that important declaration is the fact that it's being hijacked right now by people that are ambushing, assaulting, and killing our police officers for no reason other than they're police officers, and torching our communities. These are both important issues as we talk about race, and also the way that that term racism, that somebody believes they're better than somebody else because of the color of their skin, the way that that term is being thrown around. I never approve of racism. It's wrong, it's hateful, it's ignorant, it's bigoted, and it has no place in our community.
Ms. Keith, in your life as a woman and a woman of color, you've had the hurdles you've had to clear. If you're elected, speak to the issues of racial inequality and how to make us a more equal nation, and how do you in your first term specifically try to be a voice to address that concretely and legislatively to the degree that that can help be a part of moving us forward as a country? Ms. Keith.
I am particularly impressed by how Congressman Mast was able to talk about Black Lives Matter without mentioning anything about the systemic injustice that that movement is supposed to be addressing and is trying to address. The reality is that for centuries in this country, we have had this paradigm in which there is a group of people who own the rights of the Constitution and a group of people who have to beg for those rights and who are tenants and who are non-owners. That is the fundamental premise of white supremacy, which is exactly what Donald Trump has run on and has failed to condemn when directly asked about it. I also want to make something very clear. The point here is not that Black Lives Matter. It's that Black Lives matter as much as every other life. And if we are tolerating two different standards of policing, two different standards of housing and schooling, then we are not living up to that reality. That's what Black Lives Matter is. It's a movement to say we're not asking anymore. We're simply stating to you that the future of the United States is going to be equality for everyone under the law, and not just as it's written, but as it is applied. Brian said that George Floyd was punished. No, he wasn't. He was murdered.
Ms. Keith, we need to move on because we'll have about 7-8 minutes left before I give you your time, as promised, for your closes. Let me ask you a question. News Channel 5's Brian Crowley posed this. You're an Army combat vet, a disabled vet. You're a Navy veteran. You've no doubt, as I said, faced your own hurdles. You both have benefited from acts of Congress, whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act, anti-discrimination laws, and this rancorous debate. How do you promise to find common cause with Republicans like Brian Mast, or you, sir, with Democrats like Pam Keith, to help move the conversation forward? First, you, Ms. Keith.
Well, let's make clear, I've spent an entire career working with Republicans, be it in the military and the large corporations that I've represented, and in many, many other ways. In fact, they thought it not robbery to hire me at a very high price to represent them and their needs. I think the thing here is that when we talk about how we work together, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that we all sing off of different sheets of music. And that is because we have an entire news system in Fox News that feels like it can feed complete dishonesty to people, and they buy into that.
Ms. Keith, specifically and very briefly, how do you move forward the conversation in a positive way, working across the aisle with people like him? Very briefly, you've used up most of your time, but I think viewers deserve to hear it.
I think the way that you move forward is first to get rid of the cancer of Donald Trump, and we get back to this notion that America starts with telling people the truth and trying to find common ground. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that we can go forward until we stop allowing lies to be passed off as truth. That can't happen, and that's important.
Congressman Mast, how do you reach across the aisle to people like Ms. Keith and many others on the Democratic side of the aisle, if she happened to have been in Congress as you were serving, to deal with these issues and to find common cause? Is there nowhere you two can find common cause on issues facing Americans? And if so, where are they?
I do it on a daily basis, Michael. I'm ranked as one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. We spoke a lot about water issues. One of the folks that I've worked quite a bit with on our water issues is Representative Mercuso Powell, who also sits on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, a Democrat from down in Miami. We worked on numerous pieces of legislation together. But I start by doing that by looking at every person, whether they're a representative or a constituent, looking at them as a person. Just looking at them as a person that is my friend, my neighbor, a fellow American that has their own story, and somebody that no matter where we agree or disagree in this community, I ask to represent them. And I be responsible with my voice by not calling them names, by not saying if you're a Republican, you're a racist, by not saying if you're a Republican, you're a white supremacist, by not saying if you're a conservative, it's open season on you, meaning unrestricted hunting. And oh, by the way, here's a list of conservatives that it might be okay to have killed.
Congressman,
that's how you be responsible with your voice.
As promised, want to give you both a chance for closing statements. And because of our time, we are all looking at the clock because we have to. And much more we could talk about and will in the weeks to come. But as promised, you get the first chance, Congressman Mast, your closing 1:15 comments, sir.
No, listen, number one, thank you for moderating this. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I'd say this, you know, the biggest thing of being a representative, it's not being on TV or doing interviews and debates, and it's not even the legislation that it's the biggest thing. The biggest thing is the way a representative fights for the people of their community who are coming into their office every single day. Hands down, that's probably 90% of the work that we have to do. Veterans that need assistance, seniors that need assistance with Social Security or Medicare, the 20,000 people that we've had to help during coronavirus on a host of different issues, and everything else that people come into our office for. And that's my promise, that if you let me be your representative because it's your seat, then I'll do it the way that I did it in combat. I will respect you, and I will treat you like a human being when you come in, not as a commodity where I look at you and say, if you don't give me your money or your vote, then I don't have to listen to you, as my opponent said. I will treat you with respect, and I will do every single thing that I can to fight for your issues and what you care about.
Congressman Mast, thank you. And Democrat Pam Keith, your 1:15 close, please.
Elections are functionally job interviews, and you are the employer. And we are asking you to hire us as your representatives, K.W. Miller, Brian, and myself. Now, Brian is already in the job, and you got to ask, has he committed a terminable offense that he should be replaced? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. Because when it came time for him to put us as his priority and tell us what was going on with the coronavirus, he refused to do so. Yes, we do have the receipts. He was briefed on February 5th and chose to keep quiet. He has backed up Donald Trump's many lies and distortions, and that is precisely why we are in the disaster that we are in now. Our country is hurting like it hasn't in ever, because of the judgment and the dishonesty of Brian Mast. That's why we're here. So if you are one of the people whose loved one died in this community or another one, then you got to ask yourself, will Brian tell me the truth in the future when the next problem comes down the pike? Well, if it goes against his own political or financial interest, you cannot trust that he will.
Ms. Keith, we'll have to leave it there.
You may not agree with all my policies, but I'll tell you the truth.
Ms. Keith, we thank you. Our Democratic challenger, Pam Keith, the incumbent Republican, Brian Mast, and most of all, thank you for being with us. And you can always, if you missed the debate, watch it again on our WPTV app or your favorite streaming device. We always realize the debate is really only a starting point. As we begin to ask the questions of our candidates who seek to represent us, we hope you take what you heard tonight and ask more questions. Even our virtual world right now, the candidates making themselves available so you can learn yourself more about them and ask your own questions. We thank them for being part of the process. We thank you at home, as always, for joining us this night and for this special edition of To The Point. For all of us, I'm Michael Williams, wishing you and yours a good night.